Everyone, Papercut here with my second video in my Beginner's Guide series, Military Units and Unit Comps. As a reminder, these videos are heavily geared towards people who are brand new to the game, so I'm going to assume very little information. I'm going to be giving a lot of basic stuff. On top of that, I envision you playing using these videos and then playing games either in the campaign or against AI and trying to do these steps I'm giving you as a way to make learning the game a much more simplified step-by-step. Focus on things that are going to really be important as you continue to get better and make the game easier to understand. If you've been playing the game, hopefully there are things in here, tips, tricks, efficiencies that I give that are helpful to you, but don't be surprised that a lot what you're hearing are things that you might have already known, but maybe are now clearer to you because of the video. With that, let's go ahead and hop in. As a reminder, please like and subscribe. It helps immensely for a channel my size, and it really means a lot. If you're interested in joining my coaching Discord, where we talk a lot about the game, where you can get some coaching or replay reviews, that's there as well. You can also follow me on Twitch, where I stream most weeknights US time. Thank you. Also, just hit 2,000 YouTube subs. It's amazing. Thank you so much. So my first video, I talked about villagers and how important villagers are. That the central conceit of the game is if you're not making villagers, you're not getting resources. If you're not getting resources, you're probably going to lose. And in that video, I told you that when you're playing your games in the campaign and you're playing your games into the AI, if you could be making villagers the entire time, that's a huge win. Because that means that you're going to have the eco, and now we just need to get better at actually using it. So this second video is setting you up for that use of resources. And that is when you turn those resources into units, right? Without military units, you can't actually win the game. You can't just win via having more resources in your opponent. You have to make units and beat them with them. So we want to talk about the theory of units, breaking down what they can do, the counter system, things like that. So let's get into that. Oh, and also, what unit should you make? Why should you make that unit? Hypothetically, you could just make one unit and make so much of that unit you would win. But as you got better, you would need to actually use all of the units, right? So we're going to get into unit comps here as well. So this video is going to be a little bit more full than the villager video, but we are going to end with a very clear 3 steps, 3 goals you want to be working on. Understanding military units. Now, what's really nice about AOE 4 is that there is a shared unit roster. Many other RTSs, instead of having as many different options as AOE games do, they have like 3 like species or races or whatever you want to call it, and each of those is very unique with very different unit rosters. I was just playing Tempest Rising the other day. 2 options right now, both have similar ideas, but they have different units, right? In AOE 4, there's a shared unit roster, but then every civilization has some unique units. What that allows, though, is that you can flip between the civilizations and still understand the general units you should be making. And then what you're learning actually is what's the civ's unique units, or what are some unique bonuses that apply only to their units. Now, understanding the units is really important because to be able to understand what counter units to make, what units are good to make, what you should be making in certain situations, you have to understand the unit itself. There's so many times I'm coaching people who have never actually looked at a unit card. Like they didn't actually looked at the damage, the speed, the bonuses, things like that. And that really clarifies and makes it easier to understand what you should be making. So let's break down the unit card here. I have a spearman in front of you, and let's look at the things that are on a unit card. So first, you're going to have the unit type or the name of the unit. Light, melee, infantry. So every single unit card is going to have basically the unit classification, light or heavy, the type of damage it does, melee or ranged, or siege, and then if it's infantry or cavalry or siege, right? This is important because each one of these unit types can have counters. So some units counter melee units, some units counter cavalry units or infantry units, some units are better against light or heavy. Those things give you the counters immediately. So if you have a unit that counters range units, you want to know what a range unit is by looking at the card. So this unit type lays out all the specifications that could lead to counters. Next is health. Of course, that's just how much damage a unit could take. Next is armors. Armors are really important to understand and are really important to see for each unit. For every tick of armor a unit has, that reduces the damage it receives of that type by 1. You can have melee armor or ranged armor. Now, a key thing to understand is you can't actually negate damage to 0. So if this spearman has 2 armor, 2 ranged armor, and a unit does 1 ranged damage, you're only negating it down to 1. So no matter how much armor a unit can have, it will still take at least 1 damage. At the same time, though, understanding which units have high melee or high ranged armor lets you know what units you should be using against certain unit types. Lastly, there's damage. This is a flat number of 7 damage per hit by a spearman. And then you have movement speed, how fast a unit moves by tiles per second. So really the entire game is split up into little grids. One house or a mill takes up one grid. And so that's how fast they can move per second. And so understanding movement speed is important, because if you have units that are faster, they can run away from units that are slower. Now, there is a deeper dive you can do within that. If you hover over a unit's card, like at their health area, it will pop up a much more detailed version of the unit card. What sucks is that these should be in the main menu. Like, I wish you could just go through all the units and look at their cards per civilization, but you have to actually go into the game to look at the cards. So you can do this if you watch a replay. You can do this if you just open up a custom game and go into that civ yourself. I suggest you use cheats. Look up AOE 4 cheats, enable cheats and go to the custom game, so you can like go through the matches a lot faster and find the things you want to do. But so when you open this card, it gives you a lot more specific information. So let's talk about the extra stuff, because as you can see, it gives you health, it gives you armors, it gives you movement speed, but this attack usually gets a lot more in depth. First, melee units usually have 3 types of damage. They have their base damage, which they do against anybody. They have their siege damage, which they do against buildings. And then they have their special, which usually melee units have some sort of special, either defense, like for a spearman, they can do a spear wall, which where they hold and then they do extra damage. Knights have special charge attacks that do extra damage, things like that. Also, a lot of these attacks have different attack speed. So how fast a unit attacks a building is different than how fast they attack another unit. Range and siege are a little unique. Range only usually has one type of attack. So does siege. Siege has just one type of attack with different extra damage. What's really important to see here is the extra attacks some units do. So for example, this spearman, while doing 7 base damage, does plus 17 against cavalry, plus 3 against elephants. It's really, really important that you see if a unit does counter damage, how much is it and who does it do it to, so you know which unit you should be making. If you see cavalry, you want to make spears. Because spears do extra damage against cavalry. If you see spears, you're going to want to make archers, because archers, if you look at their unit card, do extra damage against spears. There's so many times I've coached people where they're like, I fought against this unit and it just killed me. I don't know why. And then we hover over the unit card and it has way more armor than they anticipated and does extra damage that they didn't know about. Things like that. So always be willing. If you've never seen a unit before, you can do it in game. It's fine. On a replay, you can do it, but look at the unit card to see, does it do extra damage? What's its specialty, basically? Lastly, all units have an age up difference. They have different stats per age that they're in. Now, unfortunately, the units don't upgrade automatically. So if you can make a unit in an age, on the next, if you go up in age, like feudal to castle, you need to upgrade that unit again. You need to pay for its upgrade. If not, it's going to be much weaker against units of that age. So for example, in Dark Age, you can make spears. Well, most civs can make spears. When you go to feudal, there is now a feudal upgrade to make that spear into a feudal version of the spear, which is called hardened. Whenever you unlock a unit, the next age you enter, you can upgrade it. So for example, for most civs, you unlock men-at-arms in castle. That men-at-arms is just good to go. When you go to imperial, you need to upgrade that men-at-arms to an imperial men-at-arm. So make sure when you go up ages, you upgrade units. We'll get more into the strategy of why to upgrade units and when to upgrade units, but in general, just do it when you age up. That's about the counter triangle in theory, and then we'll get into more specifics. In AOE 4, there is 2 different levels to this counter triangle, this idea that units counter other units. So in theory, range units beat melee units beat siege beats range. And once again, that is very broad. In general, there's a lot more nuance to that, but at its core, that's our triangle. And then the issues become, as you learn the units, you might realize some civs unique units break that triangle and require unique counters. In this video, we're not going to go into all the unique units. That would take way too much time. We're going to focus on the common roster, and then as we get more and more into these guides, we'll start going into different civs and their special units. So that takes us to the feudal triangle. The feudal triangle is very simple. I think that's why a lot of times people like playing in feudal and don't like going to castle imperial, where things get a lot more complicated. But the feudal triangle goes as follows. Archers counter light melee, which is generally spears. Some civs do have their own unique light melee units. Archers would counter those as well. And just to be clear, when I say counter, that means it does extra damage. Spears counter cavalry. So that could be horsemen, that could be knights for some civs that can make feudal knights. Any cavalry, a spearman will do extra damage against it. Then horsemen counter range units, which usually means archers, though any range unit would count at this. Horsemen do extra damage. On top of that, horsemen have extra ranged armor, so they take less damage from ranged units. Now, one thing I did want to add in, because this is an issue that pops up a lot, is the feudal men-at-arms and the feudal knight. For most civs, they unlock knights and men-at-arms in castle, though some civs get unique bonuses where they get those units in feudal. Now, they are strong, but they're weaker than the castle version, but they're still very strong. So I want to break down those units because you will see them. Feudal men at arms and knights are considered heavy units. Most units you can unlock in feudal are light units. Horsemen, archers, spearmen, they cost food and wood, are cheap and weaker. Heavy units are kind of the opposite. Heavy units cost gold. They generally have higher armor. They have high health and high base damage, but also they have no extra counter damage. So knights don't do any extra damage, men at arms don't do any extra damage against certain units. That's the trade-off. They are just generally tankier and stronger, but don't do anything extra. Light units tend to be weaker, but have very specific units they're good against. These heavy units are also generally slower than their light unit counterpart. So knights are slower than horsemen, men at arms are slower than spearmen and archers. That's purposeful. They're supposed to be really strong, but there's ways you can work around it. You can outrun them, you can outmaneuver them, or you can outmass them, because the heavy units are generally more expensive than the light version. Let's talk about countering them, because a lot of times if you play against them in a game, it can be kind of confusing or feels unfair. First, for knights, luckily you can always make spears. Spears counter knights, but the thing to keep in mind is one spear can beat one horseman pretty easily. A knight can beat a spear on its own. So generally you need 2 spears per knight to beat a knight. Now that might seem unfair. They're making knights, I'm making spearmen. Why do I have to make more spearmen? Keep in mind the cost. Knights cost 3 spearmen's worth of resources. So as long as you have enough spearmen in production or consistently making spearmen, you should be able to make more spearmen than knights can beat. Where people often fall behind is they are not making spearmen consistently. So they make a few spearmen, their opponent keeps making knights, and then they go, well, the knights beat my spearmen. Well, yeah, you didn't make enough spearmen. So however many knights you see your opponent have, you should try to have at least 2 spearmen per 1 knight. Now, for men at arms, most civs don't have a direct counter to them. The counter more is their expensiveness and their slowness. If you can just outmass them with lots and lots and lots of archers, eventually you will just start killing them just from pure archer mass. And you could do something called kite, where you move and shoot. So you move your archer back, then you do a move where you click A and then click on the ground, so they just shoot whatever they can see. Or you can have a specific men at arms they're shooting, but you just keep kiting them and they can't catch you. We'll talk more about specific ways to control military units and the strategies you try to use in another video, but just keep in mind against men at arms, it's more about just outspending them, outmaking them, and then outmaneuvering them because they are slow. Castle Age thus takes this feudal triangle and adds more complexity to it as you add heavy units and you add siege. Now, something I want to be clear about is enough heavy units, you can win a game with them. They're very strong, high health, high damage, high defense. The issue is that they're expensive, so you want to deploy them smartly or also make sure you have units that support those heavy units. Castle also includes anti-heavy units, crossbows, which have high base damage, but also do extra damage against any heavy unit. These basically become required units to get in Castle for almost any civ, because if you continue making light units and then you find a unit that makes men at arms or crossbows or knights or things like that, you're going to lose. So be ready to make crossbows in Castle. They're a very good unit. On top of that, they do okay against non-heavy units because of their high base damage, so they'll do okay against spears, they'll do okay against horsemen. Some civs also have some unique anti-heavy units, so just be on the lookout for that when you're trying out different civs. Do they have any units that do anti-heavy damage besides just crossbows? Siege as well plays a very unique role in the game. I consider them mass killers. They each have a different massing that your opponent could do that they counter. Now, it's important that Siege went through a pretty big change recently to this style, and there's a chance in the future that Siege changes again. So this is Season 10, right after Knights and Roses DLC, so if you're watching this way in the future and it's changed, I'm sorry for that. But right now, as Siege pertains to the game, they're a mass killer. Spring ults kill mass melee infantry. They have extra damage against mass melee. They're weak to range, so they don't take extra damage from range, but enough that they can be sniped by archers or crossbows. And they don't do well against cavalry either. Mangonels counter range, so they do extra damage against range units. They do AOE damage, a small AOE, not large, but still enough. So if your opponent's making pure archers or pure crossbows, good to make mangonels. But they are weak once again to horsemen, men at arms, things like that. Trebuchets counter mass buildings. Your opponent's making lots and lots of towers or lots and lots of keeps. Trebuchets are great for that. To counter siege, horsemen is a great option. Horsemen actually do extra damage against siege. They're also fast, so they can get onto the siege very quickly. Mass ranged also tends to win, even against mangonels, the unit that counters them. If you get enough ranged and you're good at moving them around, they can snipe most siege, but you need a lot of them for that to work. Lastly, Imperial sets our last wrinkle of units. There's not very many new units, and for most civs, it's where a lot of unique units reside. First, we have the Hand Cannoneer, which is a super high damage unit, and it's countered by both mangonels. It's also countered by horsemen. But what makes them really good is that just super, super high base damage, though they are very costly. Next, you have the Bombard and the Culverin. They're kind of the same unit. They do slightly different things. But Bombard and Culverins, they do have high damage against buildings, but they also are kind of like your anti-siege units since they have such high base damage. Enough Culverins, enough Bombards can snipe Mangonels, Springolds, Trebuchets, things like that. So they kind of play a role of anti-siege as well. Lastly is Rebaldequin, which is basically a really juiced Springold. Does really good air effect damage to melee units, but really weak to ranged units. How units are set up. So now we're going into a little bit of theory as well, a general understanding of these units. Melee versus range units scale a lot differently. In the early game, melee will beat range because range are generally very weaker, and there's a reason for this. Range units have low base damage, they have low health, they have low armor. That's because if you get enough range units of anything, they're generally going to win, right? They are going to just outshoot and kite melee units forever. So that's why it's important that you understand range units are weak, but generally the goal of almost any game is just getting enough range units just to kill everything, whether it's mass archers, mass crossbows, what have you, and then having enough frontline to win. In general, right? There's always going to be exceptions. That's also why melee units tend to have more health, more armor, things like that. The value armor is really, really, really important. I think a lot of times people underestimate how much just getting one extra armor really matters, but it really does. If you look at the horsemen, they start with 2 ranged armor. An archer does 4 range damage. So right now, an archer does 2 damage to a horseman. If a horseman gets 1 ranged armor upgrade, which by the way, ranged armor is one of the most important things you can get. If they get 1 ranged armor upgrade, horsemen only take 1 damage from archers. So they literally have half the damage they take from archers. Now it takes twice the amount to kill a horseman. That's really good. So don't ever underestimate the value of armor, especially against ranged units who have low base damage. Always, 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 when you're trying to figure out what a unit is good at, check the counter damage. What do they do a lot of extra damage to? And check their armor. Because generally they have really high armor against the thing they're supposed to counter. So men at arms and knights, since they're just generally strong units, have both high melee and ranged armor. But they have no extra counter damage. So there's always try to see the balance in what they're trying to offer a unit be versus what it's not meant to do. Finally, let's go into what is a unit comp, or what is a good one. The idea is that in this game, you are most likely not going to make just one unit. You want units that cover and synergize with each other. So you want to consider unit strengths and weaknesses. A classic example of a good comp is horsemen archers. Let's say your opponent's making archers. You're going to make horsemen. Horsemen counter those archers. Well, now your opponent's going to start making spears, right? Spears kill the horsemen. So you want to make archers. So in both ways, you and your opponent are each making synergetic comps. You're each countering each other. Just depends how well you play the units and how many units you have. But archers cover the spears to kill horsemen. Horsemen counter the archers, which generally archers can kill archers, right? And with enough of them, but they're each countering something that they see their opponent doing or trying to make to counter them. Now, you might say, why not I just make every single unit? I can just make all the units have an army that has everything. Generally, armies that are a little bit of everything tend to lose against armies that are really well set up and synergetic. Just because the counters will kill very quickly, and if you're not countering your opponent, their units will just survive and eventually defeat yours. So I would not suggest just doing a one-size-fits-all army. Try to have 2 to 3 units that make up the main core of your army and adjust them as you see your opponent also adjusting. Some other examples of this in action would be like men-at-arms Mangonel. Men-at-arms do well against almost everything except crossbows. Mangonels kill the crossbows. Knight Archer is another example. Knights can take on almost anything. Archers can kill the spears, which is the only real weakness knights have. And archers can also kill crossbows, which is another weakness knights have. So things like that. At the same time, the exception, you can do a single unit mass comp. That's when you make just one unit and win by just completely outmassing your opponent. This only generally works if you catch your opponent off guard before they can make a counter. So for example, the Japanese Onibagesha. It is a unique unit that is very fast, attacks very quickly, but is very, very weak, especially to archers. If your opponent catches you making Onibagesha to make archers, you're not going to win. But if you show up with a lot of Onas before they can make enough archers, you can overwhelm them and win the game that way. So usually people will do single unit comps. If their eco is super geared to that unit, it's a unique unit that has some silver special quality, and they can way outmass before their opponent realizes. Finally, we're at our goals from this lesson. I put 2, my bad. It should be 3. Our 3 big goals. Always be making units, but after you queue villagers. So keeping with the learning of the first video, always be queue villagers first, 2 to 3, then make units out of your production buildings. Adjust your military unit comp as you see your opponent's units. So if you start making horsemen first and your opponent makes spears, make archers. Practice doing that unit counter in action. And then 3, add more melee production as the game goes. So if you can queue more than 2 military units in a production building, you should add more. What you don't want to do is have your army be slowed down by the fact you can't make units fast enough. So if you end a game and you have made units the entire time, you're adjusting the comp you make based on what your opponent's making, and you keep adding military production, whether it's a barracks, an archery range, or a stable, then you're good to go. Our push goals. So if you're feeling good about those goals, you want to add a few more complexities. As always, continue scouting. We want to keep practicing that scouting. 2, be aggressive. Take fights. Learn what fights you can and can't take. It's really vital learning. Too often people are always scared to fight. They don't want to lose their army. You have to learn the limits and when you can and cannot take a fight. And you learn those by just trying. So I suggest try fighting your opponent's army. If you lose, you can then reflect on what did they have that I didn't realize? How can I take that into the future? So be aggressive. And lastly, try to have your units attack the unit they counter. So if you have spearmen, try to have them attack horsemen. If you have archers, have them attack spears, things like that. Some general tips when you're using units that will definitely have their own videos later on, but I want to give you some tips right now. First, as you're playing the game, try using hotkeys now. You'll get more and more used to them, and they're really helpful later on. So the most important hotkeys I have is cycle TC, so I can bounce back to my TC. If I make more, I have more TCs, I can control them. My control groups I tend to do: 1 is my scout or main army, 2 is my smaller raid or response army, and 3 is siege. You set a control group by gathering it together, holding control, and pressing the number. 4, I put all my production. I use tab to cycle, though F1 also works. I just like putting on 4. But 4 is all of my production. And then I have a button for all idle vills and a button for all idle military, which is really helpful, so I can gather those things regularly. Make sure that you're trying to use control groups now. It'll really help you down the road. And lastly, use shift click. So shift click is when you want a unit to do multiple things in a row. You hold shift and then click, and they'll do all those in order. So if you have archers and you want them to target spears, hold shift, click on all the spears of your opponent, and your archers will work through those spears. And then you could focus on a different unit, for example. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you liked it. Please like and subscribe. Let me know if you have any other thing you want me to make videos on. I'd be happy to always take ideas. And good luck on your games.